This story is titled, I was paying for my sister's education by working 2 jobs, but she called me a failure. Hey everyone. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. I still remember the day my sister Emily, 18 female, got into her dream school. It was like the whole house lit up. My mom screamed. My dad hugged her like he'd just won the lottery. Emily was already crying happy tears, clutching that acceptance letter like it was made of gold. The neighbors probably thought someone had hit the jackpot, and in a way, I guess we thought we had. Emily was always the golden child. Don't get me wrong. She's smart, determined, and she had big plans. She always talked about becoming some kind of lawyer or CEO. She had it all mapped out, and my parents believed in her 100%. She was their little miracle, the one they thought would go on to do amazing things and lift our family up. Me? I was the quiet kid in the background. I wasn't a failure or anything. I just didn't have those big, flashy dreams. I dropped out of college after 1 year because I couldn't afford it, and I started working full-time instead. I loved being a mechanic. Fixing cars gave me a sense of purpose, something tangible. I was saving up to buy a house one day, something small, but mine. So, when Emily got into her school, some fancy private university my parents couldn't afford, I was proud of her. I genuinely was. But I could also see the writing on the wall. I knew what was coming before they even asked. It started small. My mom would drop hints at dinner. You know, college is so expensive these days, she'd say, shaking her head. Emily deserves this opportunity, my dad would chime in, like I disagreed. Then the conversations got more pointed. It's just textbooks, honey, my mom said one evening, when Emily realized she didn't have enough money to buy her first set of books. Can you help your sister out just this once? Of course, I said yes. It was a couple $100, and she needed it. I figured it was no big deal. She'd pay me back eventually. Family helps family, right? That's what they kept saying. But just this once turned into every month. Emily didn't have a part-time job, and she wasn't on a full scholarship. Her tuition, rent, groceries, everything, it all added up fast. My parents? They didn't have the money. They were living paycheck to paycheck, always barely scraping by. I can't fault them for that, but what I can fault them for is shoving the responsibility onto me. Pretty soon, Emily started calling me directly for money. At first, it was small. A dot. Hey, can you send me $50 for groceries? I'll pay you back next week, promise. But then it escalated. My rent's due and I don't have enough. I don't know what to do, can you help? And then it wasn't even asking anymore. It was just expecting. She'd text me, rent's due tomorrow. Can you send it tonight? I worked 2 jobs to make ends meet. One as a mechanic during the day, and the second at a warehouse at night. My schedule was brutal. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., work a full shift fixing cars, scarf down some food in my truck, and then head to the warehouse for the night shift. I didn't get home until after midnight most nights, and then I'd do it all over again the next day. But I kept telling myself it was temporary. I'd think, once Emily graduates, this will all be worth it. She'll get a good job, and it'll all balance out. I wanted to believe that. I wanted to believe that my sacrifices were building her future. But as the months rolled on, the resentment started creeping in. Here's the thing. Emily didn't act like someone who was struggling. She acted like someone who was thriving. Her Instagram was full of pictures of her drinking overpriced lattes, going out to brunch with friends, wearing clothes that I could never dream of affording. Fancy boots, trendy handbags, new phone, and there I was, sitting in my beat-up truck, eating a $1 menu burger because I couldn't afford anything else. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe she was just posting those things for appearances. Maybe her friends were paying for some of it. But when I asked her one night, she just laughed it off. Everyone at school dresses like this, she said. I don't want to look like I don't fit in. She didn't say thank you. She didn't ask if I was okay. She just shrugged it off like it didn't matter. And honestly, I started to feel like I didn't matter. My parents weren't any better. Every time I tried to bring up how hard it was on me, they'd brush me off. She's your sister, my mom said one evening. You're doing a good thing. You should be proud of yourself. Proud? Proud of what? That I was putting my life on hold so Emily could live the life I'd never get to have? Because that's what it felt like. I couldn't save any money. I couldn't take time off work. I couldn't do anything except work and sleep. It wasn't just Emily that was the problem. It was the way everyone in my family acted like this was the natural order of things. Like my life was somehow less important because I wasn't destined to do great things like she was. The day I realized just how bad it had gotten was when Emily casually mentioned over the phone that she wanted to study abroad. She didn't even ask me. She just said it like it was already decided. It costs a little more, but it's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, she said, her voice light and carefree. You'll figure it out, right? I don't know why that particular moment set me off, but it did. I sat there gripping the phone, my knuckles white, while she rattled on about how amazing it would be. Like it was nothing for me to work even harder to send her to Europe for a semester. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I started calculating in my head how much of my life I'd given up for her. Thousands of dollars. Years of time. All my energy. I didn't even recognize myself anymore. But Emily didn't see any of that. To her, I was just the brother who worked all the time. Her personal ATM. I told myself things would change. I'd just keep my head down, work through it, and everything would get better. I didn't realize how wrong I was until that family dinner. The dinner that broke me. After that conversation about Emily's study abroad plans, something inside me shifted. I was already stretched thin, but the thought of having to pick up even more hours for something like that pushed me to the edge. Still, I didn't say anything. Not to her, not to my parents, not to anyone. I'd gotten too used to being quiet, to keeping my feelings bottled up while everyone else talked over me. It's weird how resentment builds. At first, it's just small annoyances, things you brush off, like when Emily would call me late at night, casually dropping that her rent was due tomorrow like it was no big deal. Or when she'd post photos of herself holding some fancy cocktail with her friends, all dressed up like they were on a red carpet. Meanwhile, I was eating instant ramen in my tiny studio apartment, trying to convince myself it was fine. It's fine. She's your sister. It's fine. This won't last forever. It's fine. You'll figure it out. I told myself those things so often I started to believe them. I think part of me was scared to admit how much I resented the situation, because then I'd have to confront it. I wasn't ready for that yet. One night, I came home after a double shift, completely wiped out. I opened my fridge to find a single bottle of water and half a loaf of stale bread. I'd forgotten to buy groceries because my schedule had been so packed, and payday was still a week away. I sat down at my tiny kitchen table, staring at the nothingness in front of me, and I just felt empty. I picked up my phone and scrolled through Instagram like I always did when I couldn't sleep. There it was. Emily's latest post. She was out at some rooftop bar with her friends, the city skyline glittering in the background. Her caption read, "Work hard, play harder. Love this life." I don't know what came over me, but I felt sick to my stomach. Work hard? Did she even understand what that meant? I was working harder than I ever had in my life, and what did I have to show for it? A broken back, an empty fridge, and a dream of owning a house that was now so far out of reach I couldn't even picture it anymore. And there she was, loving life, paid for by me. It got worse over time. Every time Emily called me, it felt less like a conversation and more like a transaction. She never asked how I was doing, never said thank you. Instead, her calls always started with, "Hey, so I have a small favor to ask," followed by some new expense she couldn't cover. Her excuses started to wear thin too. It was always a period. "Classes are just too much to balance with a job. I'll pay you back, I promise. It's just tight right now. It's not like I'm wasting the money. I need this stuff." But did she really need another shopping spree? Another night out with friends? Another overpriced coffee she could have made at home? I started to realize Emily didn't understand what tight actually meant. For her, it was an inconvenience. For me, it was skipping meals and staying up late worrying about how I'd make it through the month. One night, I snapped. It was around 11:30 p.m., and I was just getting off my second shift when Emily called. I considered ignoring it, but I knew she'd just text me until I picked up. "Hey, Emily," I said, already tired. She didn't waste any time. "Can you send me $150? Friends and I are going to this thing, and I'm short on cash." I nearly dropped my phone. "What?" "Emily, it's 11:30 at night. You're asking me for $150 to go out? Are you serious right now?" "Relax," she said, laughing like I was the unreasonable one. "It's just $150. I'll pay you back later." I'd heard that line so many times it didn't even register anymore. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Emily, do you even know what my life looks like right now? I work 14-hour days. I don't eat sometimes because I can't afford it. And you're asking me for money so you can party?" She paused, clearly annoyed. "It's not just partying. I have to keep up appearances, okay? Everyone at school goes out. If I don't, I look weird. I don't know what pissed me off more. The entitlement or the fact that she genuinely thought this was normal. I'm done, I said bluntly. I can't keep doing this, Emily. What do you mean you're done? Her tone was sharp now. You've always helped me. You can't just stop. I can and I will, I shot back. You need to figure this out yourself. I hung up before she could say anything else, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd taken a breath of fresh air. It didn't last long, though, because the guilt set in almost immediately. What if she couldn't make rent? What if she really did need me? That night, I didn't sleep at all. The next day, my mom called. Of course, Emily had run straight to her. What's this I hear about you not helping your sister? She demanded. She's struggling and you're just going to let her fail? I was too tired to argue. Mom, I can't keep doing this. I'm drowning. You don't understand what this is doing to me. She's your sister, she said, as if that was supposed to solve everything. You're supposed to look out for her. That's when I realized they didn't see it. None of them did. They didn't see how much I was sacrificing, how much it was breaking me. In their eyes, I was just the guy who could figure it out every time Emily needed something. But what about me? Who was going to help me? I didn't have an answer to that, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. The family dinner was coming up in a few weeks, and I already had a bad feeling about it. Emily was back home for her break, and I knew they'd talk about her study abroad plans. I wasn't sure how I'd handle it, but one thing was clear. I was reaching my breaking point, and it was only a matter of time before something gave. Then came the family. I didn't even want to go to this one. My mom practically begged me. Emily's home for the break, she'd said over the phone. It'll be nice for the whole family to sit down together. Nice? Yeah, right. Every family dinner since Emily started college had turned into a full-blown Emily appreciation night. My parents would sit there hanging on her every word while I got treated like part of the wallpaper. Still, I caved. Maybe part of me wanted them to see how tired I was. Maybe I hoped they'd notice that I wasn't okay. When I showed up, Emily was already in the spotlight. She was sitting at the table, talking with that confident tone of hers, as my parents hovered around her like she was royalty. I could hear her voice as soon as I walked through the door. Yeah, I'm really thinking about going to Paris for the study abroad program. Everyone I know is doing it. It'd be life-changing. I froze for a second in the doorway. Paris? So she wasn't even trying to be subtle anymore. Hey, honey, come in, my mom called when she saw me. She smiled warmly, but her attention was back on Emily in seconds. I went to wash up and mentally braced myself. When I sat down at the table, Emily didn't even look up. She was scrolling through her phone, probably checking social media or answering texts. My dad was pouring drinks, and my mom was already peppering her with questions. So, tell us more about this program. What classes would you take? What's the city like? Emily launched into an enthusiastic explanation, painting Paris like it was some magical wonderland. It's such a great opportunity, Mom. You get to study, but also explore museums, culture, food. It's like learning while traveling. It's perfect. She looked up suddenly and smiled at me. You're gonna love it too, big brother. You'll just have to work a little harder, that's all. It took me a second to process what she'd just said. I set my fork down slowly. What do you mean I'll have to work harder? I asked, keeping my tone as even as I could. Emily didn't even hesitate. Well, someone has to pay for it. It's only for a semester, and it's not that much money compared to my tuition. Plus, it's a once-in-a-lifetime thing. She said it so casually, like she wasn't asking me to trade even more of my life for her dream trip. I looked at her, then at my parents. Neither of them said anything. They were just smiling, nodding along like this was the most reasonable thing in the world. Finally, I asked, how exactly do you think I'm supposed to pay for that? I'm already working 2 jobs to cover your rent. Emily laughed. She laughed. You've always been such a workaholic. What's a little more overtime? It'll be worth it for me, right? I don't know what snapped inside me, but I couldn't hold back anymore. I leaned forward, my voice firm, but calm. Emily, do you even understand what it takes for me to work 2 jobs? I don't choose this. I do it because I have no choice. And now you want me to pay for Paris? The table went quiet. My mom shot me a look like I'd just insulted Emily. My dad set his fork down. Emily, on the other hand, rolled her eyes and scoffed. Oh my God, calm down. Why do you always have to act like such a martyr? It's not that big a deal. That's when she said it. The thing that's been burned into my brain ever since. Maybe if your life wasn't going nowhere, you wouldn't be so bitter all the time. I swear. Time froze. The words hung in the air like smoke, choking me. I looked at her, really looked at her, and I felt something snap. After all the years of sacrifice, of exhaustion, of breaking myself for her dreams, she had the audacity to look at me like I was the failure. Excuse me? I said quietly, my voice low. Emily shrugged, playing with her fork like she didn't just drop a bomb. Well, it's true. You're always working. You never go anywhere or do anything? Maybe you should stop being so jealous of me and focus on your own life. It's hard to describe what I felt in that moment. Anger, yes. Hurt, definitely. But more than anything, it was the realization that Emily didn't see me as her brother. I was a wallet, a resource, an afterthought. I pushed my chair back and stood up. The sound echoed in the silence. You think I'm jealous of you, Emily? I said, my voice shaking with restrained fury. My life isn't going anywhere because I've spent the last 3 years paying for yours. I'm working 14-hour days so you can party, buy clothes, and live in some fantasy. And you call me a failure? What exactly have you done, Emily? Huh? Nothing. Enough! My mom snapped, trying to stop me, but I wasn't done. I turned to my parents. And you two? You've stood by and let this happen. You've enabled her. You've made me feel like I don't matter because I'm not your golden child. Well, I'm done. I'm done paying for her rent, her tuition, everything. She can figure it out herself. Emily's face went pale. You can't do that, she said, panic finally creeping into her voice. How am I supposed to live? I'll lose my apartment. That's not my problem, I said coldly. Figure it out. And with that, I grabbed my jacket and walked out. My mom was yelling something behind me, and Emily started crying, but I didn't look back. I walked straight to my car, got in, and just sat there for a minute. My hands were shaking, my heart was pounding, but for the first time in years, I felt free. After I left that dinner, I drove home in total silence. I didn't even turn on the radio, just sat there, staring at the road, trying to process everything that had just happened. My mind kept replaying Emily's words like a broken record. Your life isn't going anywhere. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. Not because I thought she was right, but because after everything I'd done for her, that was how she saw me. By the time I got home, my phone was already lighting up. I knew exactly who it was without even looking. I dropped my keys on the counter, flopped down onto my couch, and let out a deep sigh as the screen buzzed again and again. First, it was Emily. Period. What's wrong with you? You embarrassed me in front of everyone. Then my mom. You had no right to blow up like that. She's your sister. I put my phone on silent and tossed it face down on the table. I needed time to breathe, to clear my head, but they wouldn't let me. The next morning, I woke up to even more messages. Emily had taken her sob story straight to social media. I opened Instagram out of habit, and there it was. A photo of her sitting on her bed, head in her hands, captioned, "When people you trust the most let you down." Her friends flooded the comments with support. You don't deserve that, babe. Some people don't know what family means, SMH. You'll get through this, queen. I felt my blood boil. I didn't care what her friends thought of me, but the sheer gall of her acting like I was the villain in this story made me furious. She didn't tell them that I'd been paying for everything for years. She didn't tell them how much I'd given up. No, she just painted herself as the victim. Classic Emily move. That's when I decided I wasn't going to play her game. I didn't comment, didn't text her back. I stayed quiet. Let her throw her tantrum. But of course, that wasn't enough for my mom. Around noon, my phone rang. I let it go to voicemail. She called again, and again. By the fourth call, I finally picked up. What? I said, not bothering to hide the irritation in my voice. What's gotten into you? My mom demanded. She was angry, really angry. Emily told me what happened. How could you say those things to her? She's devastated. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. Mom, I didn't say anything that wasn't true. I've been working 2 jobs to pay for her life while she treats me like I'm nothing. I can't do it anymore. She's your sister, she snapped. You're supposed to help her. Help her, I repeated, my voice rising. I've been carrying her. And what has she done for me, huh? Not once has she said thank you. Not once has she asked how I'm doing. I've given up everything for her, and you're mad at me? My mom went quiet for a second, probably surprised I was finally standing up for myself. Then she sighed heavily. She's young. She doesn't understand yet. You need to have some patience. No, I said firmly. I've been patient. I've been too patient. It's time for her to figure it out herself. She didn't respond to that. Instead, she muttered something about me being selfish and hung up. For the next few days, it was like I was the villain of the entire family. My phone was blowing up nonstop. Relatives I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly felt the need to chime in. She's struggling. You can't just abandon her. Family comes first. You're being really cruel. I ignored them all. Let them think what they wanted. I was done being the doormat. Then came the landlord call. Emily must have told him I paid her rent because he called me directly when the payment didn't go through. The conversation was short and awkward. Hi, I'm looking for payment on Emily's apartment rent. She doesn't live here, I said. You need to talk to her about that. When I hung up, I almost felt bad. Almost. But Emily had put herself in this situation. About a week later, Emily showed up at my apartment. I knew it was her as soon as I heard the frantic knocking on my door. I debated not answering, but I didn't want her banging all day. When I opened the door, she looked different. Her hair was messy, her eyes red like she'd been crying, and she wasn't dressed like her usual put-together self. You can't just cut me off, she said, her voice cracking. What am I supposed to do now? I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. Figure it out, Emily. Get a job. Budget your money. Welcome to the real world. She looked at me like I'd just spoken a foreign language. I don't know how to do that. That's not my problem, I replied. She stepped forward, pleading now. Please, just one more month. I'll find a way to pay you back, I swear. I shook my head. Number, I've heard that before. I'm not doing this anymore. Her face crumpled, and for a second I thought she might actually get it. But instead, she flipped. You're so cruel, she shouted, tears streaming down her face. You're supposed to help me. That's what family does. I sighed. Family doesn't take advantage of each other, Emily. You've had years to learn how to stand on your own, but you never tried. That's on you, not me. She stood there crying, saying things like, You don't understand, and you've ruined my life. But I didn't budge. Eventually, she gave up. She stormed off, slamming my apartment door behind her. I watched her leave through the window, feeling a weird mix of emotions. Relief, sadness, anger. I wasn't heartless. I did feel bad for her. But at the same time, I knew this was the only way she'd ever learn. If I kept rescuing her, she'd never figure out how to stand on her own. That night, my mom called again. She came home in tears, she said, her voice trembling with disappointment. How could you do this to her? I took a deep breath. Because it's the only way she's going to grow up, Mom. You're tearing this family apart, she said quietly. I paused, then replied, No, Mom. I'm just not letting you all tear me apart anymore. For once, I didn't feel guilty. After Emily's meltdown at my apartment, things escalated faster than I thought they would. I didn't hear from her directly again, but she wasn't going to let this go quietly. Instead, she found other ways to get to me, through my parents, extended family, and even mutual friends. It was like she was on a mission to punish me for standing up to her. It started with my mom's calls. She was relentless. Every day after work, I'd see her name pop up on my phone, and every day I'd send her to voicemail. She alternated between guilt trips and anger. Her messages started with things like, Emily is struggling and you just don't care anymore. You're breaking this family apart. Then, when that didn't work, she'd try to play the I raised you better card. I didn't raise you to be so selfish. Selfish. That word stuck with me. Was I selfish for wanting my life back? Was I selfish for not wanting to burn myself out anymore? The silence in my apartment felt heavier than usual. I sat on the couch one night staring at my ceiling, thinking about everything. I realized how much space Emily had taken up in my mind for the past few years. Every decision I'd made, every hour I'd worked, every dollar I'd saved, it all revolved around keeping her afloat. I had been so busy playing her provider that I forgot to take care of myself. But Emily? She was doing what Emily always did, making everything worse for herself. It didn't take long for the news to spread that Emily had moved back in with my parents. I found out through one of my co-workers, of all people. Apparently, her GoFundMe page had made the rounds on Facebook. I didn't even follow her, but someone had seen it and brought it up at work. Hey man, isn't this your sister? My coworker asked during our lunch break, shoving his phone in my face. Sure enough, there it was. A picture of Emily, looking absolutely pitiful, captioned, Desperate times, unexpected expenses have turned my life upside down. Anything helps. Her goal was set at $3,000, and she'd already raised about $200. Her sob story wasn't exactly hitting like she thought it would. What a joke, my coworker muttered, shaking his head. She sounds like a scammer. I didn't even respond. I was too embarrassed. I grabbed my sandwich and walked out to my truck, suddenly needing to be alone. Emily was out there begging strangers for money when she could have just figured it out like every other adult. I knew she had options, a part-time job, cutting back her spending, moving somewhere cheaper. But instead, she was still playing the victim. Word about Emily's situation eventually reached the extended family, and suddenly I was getting phone calls from people I hadn't heard from in years. The first one was my aunt, my mom's sister. You need to fix this, she said over the phone like I'd broken some family heirloom. Emily's young. She made some mistakes, but you're her older brother. You're supposed to guide her. I did guide her, I shot back. I guided her through rent, tuition, and groceries for 3 years. She didn't learn anything. How is that my fault? There was silence on her end. And then she sighed. Family takes care of each other, honey. That's just how it works. Family doesn't take advantage of each other, I said firmly. And if you care so much, maybe you should send her some money. That ended the conversation pretty quickly. Emily's situation had gone from bad to worse. I didn't hear it from her, of course. She hadn't spoken to me since the day she stormed out of my apartment. Instead, I heard about it through friends and a few nosy relatives. She had burned through the last of my parents' savings, trying to keep up appearances, ordering food delivery almost daily, buying new clothes she didn't need, and pretending nothing had changed. Eventually, the bubble burst. She maxed out the credit cards, and my parents were left to deal with the debt. I'd like to say that Emily learned her lesson, but the truth is, she didn't. She doubled down on blaming me for abandoning her. Apparently, in Emily's mind, I was the reason her life was falling apart. Not her spending habits, not her entitlement, not her refusal to take responsibility. At some point, you just have to stop caring. And I did. A month after that disastrous family dinner, I got a text from my dad. We need to talk. Please come over. I stared at the message for a solid minute, debating whether I should even bother. I didn't want to get pulled back into the drama, but curiosity got the better of me. I hadn't seen my parents since that night, and I wanted to know what they'd say. When I got to their house, I was surprised at how different it felt. The atmosphere was tense, heavy. It was like the air itself had absorbed all the stress in the house. My dad was sitting at the table, rubbing his temples like he'd been dealing with a headache for days. My mom stood at the counter, clearly trying not to cry. Emily was nowhere to be seen. Where's Emily? I asked, breaking the silence. My dad sighed, looking 10 years older than he had the last time I'd seen him. She's staying with a friend. We couldn't handle it anymore. I blinked. What do you mean? She maxed out all the cards, my mom said softly, her voice trembling. We're completely tapped out. We had to tell her she couldn't stay here unless she started paying her own way. She didn't take it well. I leaned against the chair, processing what they'd just told me. My parents, who had defended Emily for years, who had enabled her behavior at every turn, had finally reached their limit. Part of me felt vindicated. The other part just felt tired. What do you want from me? I asked, crossing my arms. My dad looked up at me with a mixture of shame and desperation. We don't know what to do. You were right about her, and we didn't listen. But now we're drowning, and we can't fix this alone. I shook my head, letting out a bitter laugh. You think I'm going to bail you out? After everything you've put me through? After everything she put me through? My mom stepped forward. We're not asking you for money. We don't know how to deal with her anymore. She won't listen to us. Welcome to the club, I said, shaking my head. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you for years. You let her walk all over everyone, and now you're shocked she's still doing it? My dad didn't say anything. My mom looked like she wanted to argue, but even she couldn't deny the truth. For years, they'd made excuses for Emily. They'd let her get away with everything because it was easier than holding her accountable. And now they were paying the price for it, literally and figuratively. I didn't stick around long after that. I told them I was sorry they were struggling, but I couldn't fix their problems. They needed to figure this out themselves, just like Emily did. It wasn't my responsibility to clean up their mess anymore. I heard bits and pieces about Emily's life over the next few months. She bounced between friends' couches for a while, burning through relationships the same way she burned through money. People got tired of her behavior pretty quickly. Eventually, she had no choice but to get a part-time job at a local coffee shop. I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel a small sense of satisfaction when I found out. Not because I wanted her to suffer, but because it meant she was finally being forced to face reality. As for me, things got better. Slowly but surely. I started saving up again, and within a year, I finally hit my goal. I bought a small house on the outskirts of town, a fixer-upper, but it was mine. I spent my weekends working on it, painting walls, fixing pipes, and building a place I could call home. It wasn't fancy, but it didn't have to be. I also started reconnecting with my friends. I realized how much I'd shut myself off from the world while I was sacrificing everything for Emily. Now that I didn't have that weight hanging over me, I felt lighter. I felt like me again. One night, I got a text from Emily. It was short and to the point. Period. Hey, I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I didn't realize how much you did for me until now. I hope you're doing okay. I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond, wanted to tell her that it was okay, that I forgave her. But another part of me wasn't ready. I'd spent too long being her crutch, and I wasn't going to risk falling back into that role. Instead, I put the phone down and walked outside. I sat on the steps of my porch, breathing in the cool night air, and realized something. I didn't owe her an answer. Not yet. Maybe someday I'd be ready to forgive her, but for now I was happy to just be free. Emily would figure her life out eventually, or she wouldn't. Either way, it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had my own life to live, and for the first time in years, I was finally living it.